And welcome. In this video, I will discuss subnetting in a manner that would be easy to understand. So let's start. So this is a network that is 192.168.4.0, and this network has a subnet mask of /24. Now it means that this network contains around 256 IP addresses. So the first IP address would be the network ID of this network, and the last IP address would be the broadcast IP address of this network. And the IPs in between these two IP addresses, that is the network ID and the broadcast IP, can be used for the endpoints you want to assign the IP addresses to. So the first IP address of this network would be the 192.168.4.0. that would be the network ID, and the last IP address would be the 192.168.4.255. that would be the broadcast IP address. So if you take this network as the 256 IP addresses, and you want to further subdivide this network into two portions, then the first portion would contain the IP addresses from 0 to 127, and the second portion, or the second subnet, would contain the IP addresses from 128 till 255. So once you perform this kind of subnetting, then you will create the first subnet of 192.168.4.0. So here you can see that the network ID is the same, but the slash notation or the subnet mask has been changed from 24 to 25. So this subnet would contains the IP addresses from 0 to 127, and the next network would contain the IP addresses from 128 till 255. So the first network would have the network ID of 4.0, and the broadcast IP would be the 4.127, and the second subnet would contain the network ID or the subnet ID of 4.128. that would be the first IP address of this network, and the last IP address, that is the 4.255, would be the broadcast IP of this subnet. So if you want to further divide this original network of /24 into four subnets, then the first subnet would have the same ID but with /26 subnet mask, and the first IP address would be the subnet ID, that would be 4.0, and the last IP address, that is 4.63, would be the subnet, the broadcast IP. And similarly, the second network would have 64 as its the subnet ID, and 4.127 as its broadcast IP address. And the third network would have 4.128 as its network ID or the subnet ID, and 4.191 would be the broadcast IP address. And the fourth subnet would have 4.192 as its subnet ID, and 4.255 would be the last IP, and it would be the broadcast IP address. So if you want to further divide the original network of /24 into 8 networks, so now the first network would have around 32 IP addresses, and each of these 8 networks would have 32 IP addresses. And if you multiply this number of 32 IP addresses with 8, then you will get the same IP addresses, that is 256 IP addresses that was of original network of /24. So the first network would have the network ID of 4.0 with /27 subnet mask, and the last IP address of this network would be its broadcast IP address, that would be 4.31. with /27 notation. And similarly, the second network 4.32 would be its network ID, and 4.63 would be its broadcast IP address. And the next one have 4.64 as its network ID, and the 4.95 as its broadcast IP address. And similarly, the other 5 subnets. Now, if you want to further divide the original networks of /24 into 16 networks, then each of these 16 networks would contain 16 IP addresses. So the first IP address would be its network ID, and the last IP address of each of these networks would be their respective broadcast IP addresses. So the first the first subnet would be the 4.0, but this time with /28 subnet mask, and its broadcast IP address would be the 4.15. And the next network would have 4.16 as its subnet ID, and 4.31 as its broadcast ID or broadcast IP address. And then the next one would have 32 as its subnet ID, and 4.47 as its broadcast IP address, and similarly other 16 networks. Now, if you want to further divide this network of /24 into 32 networks, each of these 32 networks would contain 8 IPs, and the first IP would be the network or the subnet ID of that respective network, and the last IP address that would be the broadcast IP address, and the in between the 6 IPs can be used for endpoints. So the first subnet would be again same, that is 4.0, but this time with /29. So it would have 8 IP addresses. So the first IP address, that is 4.0, would be its subnet ID, and the last IP address, that is 4.7, would be its broadcast IP. And then the next one would start from 8, that would be its network ID, and the last IP address, that is 4.15, would be its broadcast IP address. And similarly the other 32 networks. Now, if you want to divide this original network of /24 into 64 subnets, each of these 64 subnets would contain 4 IP addresses. So the first IP address would be used as the subnet ID of that network, and the last IP address, that is the fourth IP address, would be used as its broadcast IP address, and the in between 2 IP addresses can be used to connect two point-to-point devices. So the first IP address or the subnet ID would be the same one, but this time with /30 notation, and its broadcast IP address would be 4.3, and the 2 IP addresses, that is 4.1 and 4.2, can be used to connect 2 devices point to point. So the next subnet would start from 4.4, and it would go till 4.7, and the subnet ID would be the 4.4, and the broadcast IP address would be 4.7. And next network would be 4.8 as its subnet ID, and its broadcast ID would be 4.11, and then the next one, similarly next one, and so on. Now, this was all with regards to subnetting. So once we talk about supernetting, so supernetting combines the 2 networks. So this was the original network of /24, which I have showed you at the start of previous slide. So if you want to combine these 2 networks, then you can combine these 2 networks by creating a network of /23 subnet mask. So the network ID would be the first IP address of first network, and the broadcast IP address would be the last IP address of second network or the last network. So in this case, the first IP address would be the 192.168.4.0. It would be the supernet network ID with /23 subnet mask, and the broadcast IP address would be the last IP address of 5.0 network, that is 192.168.5.255 with /23 notation. So similarly, you can aggregate other networks as well. So this 2.0/23 subnet mask will have two networks, that is 2.0 and 3.0. So 2.0 would be the network ID with /23 notation, and 3.255 would be the broadcast IP address. That is the last IP address of three network. And similarly, the zero network will have 0.0 and 0.1 or 1.0, and it would have the network ID of 0.0, and the broadcast IP address would be the 1.255. And similarly, other networks. So this last network would have the network ID of 14.0, and its broadcast IP address would be the 15.255. Now you can further supernet these two networks into one single network. This time it would have /22 subnet mask. So the first IP address would be the first IP of this network, that is 192.168.4.0, and its broadcast IP address would be the last IP address of last network, that is 7.255. So in between these addresses, these all IP addresses can be used for endpoints, but you cannot use these two IP addresses. These are just used for network IDs and the broadcast IPs. So similarly, the other network would have 0.0 as its network ID, and 2 dot, or rather 3.255 would be its broadcast IP address. And this 8.0/22 network would have the 8.0 as its network ID, and 11.255 as its broadcast IP address. And this 12.0 network would have 12.0/22 as its network ID, and 15.255 as its broadcast IP address. Now you can further supernet these two networks into a single network, but this time with /21 subnet mask, and the first IP address of first network would be the subnet ID, that is 192.168.0.0 /21, and the last IP address, that would be the 192.168.7.255 would be the broadcast IP address. And similarly, these two networks can be aggregated and supernetted into one single network of /21, and the network ID would be 8.0, and its broadcast IP address would be the last IP address of last network, that is 15.255. So this was all from my side. Please stay connected to my channel for similar videos. Thank you.